Hello. Welcome back to the Space Gulag, otherwise known as PPSW, your favorite hand blast. Today we're back with another Star Wars story. Today we'll discover what would have happened had Qui Gon Jinn survived his duel with Darth Maul and carried on to train and raise Anakin Skywalker as his own apprentice. Before we begin this video, special thanks to our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of the Pente team. One chance to win in the next giveaway, watch the end of the video and I will tell you how you can win. Our story begins inside the Naboo hangar. Obi-Wan and Qui Gon take the lead as the group is faced down by a Zabrak Sith. The Queen and her guard make a run in the opposite direction in their attempt to capture Nute Gunray and the rest of his Goonies, while the Gungans and the Naboo Defense Force work to take back the city and the planes from the Trade Federation battle droids. At the moment, everything was tense, as it could be on Naboo. The Gungans sat in the battlefield bombarded by ATTs, while the Queen's Guard faced down sets of destroyer droids. At the same time, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were about to begin their duel with this mysterious Sith that they encountered on Tatooine not long before. Anakin was currently inside of a cockpit hiding from the action. The kid had a good heart though. He couldn't let anything happen to his new friend Padme Amidala. She and her people were in danger. Anakin played around in the cockpit of the ship as it began to creep forward. R2 and him shot massive shells into destroyer droids, clearing a path for the Queen to get to her throne room. Anakin looked down into his cockpit and saw a small device. He asked R2 what was on the device, and the little droid whistled back. Anakin read the translation on the screen as R2 told him it was Raid Shadow Legends. R2 told Anakin to forget about the Battle of Naboo to try this awesome game. Anakin never heard of Raid, so he listened in. If you thought taking down a droid control ship was hard, then you haven't faced the Doom Tower. To beat the Doom Tower, one needs to amass an army of champions. Sure, the regular Doom Tower levels are easy, but the boss battles are more difficult than getting Mace Windu's approval.
Take a seat.
Even more than the Doom Tower, Raid just released Awakening. It's a brutal new dungeon, the Iron Twin Fortresses. If you're able and good enough to take down the Iron Twins, you'll be in for a huge payoff that allows you to awaken your champions. It's like finding out you're the Jedi's chosen one. Correct, there is more R2. A legendary new version of everyone's favorite character and champion has just been released, Ultimate Death Knight. This makes Vader look weak. What? Ultimate Death Knight is everything we hope for in a champion. Powerful, poised, and everyone can get him for free. All you have to do is log in and play Raid for 7 days between now and October 27th. There's never been a better time to join Sky Guy and R2-D2 on Raid Shadow Legends. If you use DK Rise's promo code, you'll get a bunch of free items to instantly level up your new champion all the way to level 50. If you haven't started playing Raid, click my link in the description or scan the QR code and you'll get up to $30 in bonuses. The free epic champion Rector Drath, 200,000 silver, an energy refill, and an XP boost, and one ancient shard to summon more awesome champions once you get into the game. So click the link in the description or scan the QR code and join PPSW, Sky Guy, and R2-D2. We'll be waiting for you. R2, say thank you to Raid for sponsoring this video. Anakin turned around and looked at R2 in shock. He'd never heard of such a good deal before. Anakin's ship was quickly put into autopilot and shot off into the air. Qui-Gon couldn't focus on this because he was in the middle of a duel. The Sith assassin was very talented. He was very obviously not going to give up easily. Jinn had the fortune of being trained by one of the Order's best duelists in Master Dooku though. Obi-Wan was trained by Qui-Gon and he was a formidable duelist, but nothing like that of his master. Yet, the two Jedi used each other as to keep their strength together. Maul was extremely acrobatic as he flipped around without a notion of being able to be stopped by the two Jedi. Maul was fierce. His double-sided lightsaber slammed back on the two Jedi. Jinn hadn't faced a double-sided lightsaber since he last sparred with Pong Krell. Jinn stepped forward as he and his apprentice took the duel as seriously as they could. Jinn knew that they needed to kill Maul on their terms, because if they didn't, then Jinn could get worn down and lose his stamina. Not only that, but even possibly his life. Obi-Wan knew that his master was getting old, and of course, he didn't want to see Qui-Gon falter to the young talent that was obviously Maul. So he took as much of the brunt as he could against Maul. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan needed to calm down and work together, but the Sith had been waiting for this moment to reveal himself. Maul was here to kill two Jedi, no more and no less. He'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. He was taught to be a warrior. The Jedi had been taught to be peacekeepers, and only to fight when it was necessary. Now Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were in the grind. They had to fight their way out of the space gulag they were trapped in with Maul. Kenobi faked forward as Maul bounced for a counterattack before having to sidestep a strike by Jinn. Maul had prepared the layout of this battle, and he knew he would have a better advantage if he went forward into a massive energy room. Maul used the Force to break open the hangar bay doors as he leapt backwards onto the massive walkway with a drop that looked to be bottomless. Qui Gon threw his hand into Obi-Wan's chest, like a sort of seatbelt, as he told Kenobi,
"Stay here, Obi-Wan. He wants us to follow him. We must be mindful."
But Master, we have him. He is one, we are two.
And he knows that. He wouldn't lead us here if he believed he could beat us without his own advantage. We must be patient, and let him come to us. He doesn't have the patience to keep this charade up for long.
What makes you think that, Master?
Look at his stance, Obi-Wan. He's poised like a star next to him. We must let him starve himself out. The chances that his master convinced him he could kill us were very high. He's learning that Jedi aren't as weak as the Sith like to believe.
Obi-Wan looked at Maul and noticed that Maul was giddy on his feet. He jumped back and forth with the inability to find a calm resolve. Obi-Wan then looked over to his master as he realized that Qui-Gon had steadied himself into a shoulder-width apart stance, with his blade next to his chest, with the calm and steady breathing of the wind. Obi-Wan sometimes was very standoffish with his master, but it was moments like this that made Obi-Wan truly appreciate the bond he had with his teacher. Obi-Wan steadied himself and mirrored his master as he calmed down and shallowed his own breath. The two Jedi watched Maul. His anger began to rise as his legs couldn't stop moving. His impatience made him weak, and the Jedi pried on it. They saw the opportunity to seize his weakness and rise above him. Maul growled and then cried out as he ran forward, whipping his blade across his body. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon moved simultaneously as they blocked the lightsaber attack from Maul. The lightsaber bounced off the Jedi's blades as Maul pulled it back into his hands. Maul then leapt into the air above the two Jedi, into the massive room. Kenobi and Jinn doubled back as they both moved into Form 4 and leaned their blades back. As Maul came down from the ceiling, Obi-Wan swung forward as Jinn doubled back. The Master and Apprentice had Maul just where they wanted him. Maul was vicious as he swung violently against Obi-Wan. The younger Jedi had the stamina and the skill to play defense against Maul. And while Kenobi hadn't become Master Holother or even the Master of Form 3 yet, he was still very an accomplished duelist. Qui-Gon jumped over as he tried to help his student, but even Jinn was amazed by the charisma of his student. It was like slow motion, the way Obi-Wan blocked every strike, throwing his blade behind his back, and blocked a strike at his spine as he twisted around and put some space between him and Maul. The Sith assassin was taken aback. Sidious taught him that Jedi were weak, especially after Jinn ran away from him on Tatooine. He was inclined to believe that the Jedi wouldn't be able to be a real threat to him. Sure, there were certain Jedi he feared like Windu or Plo Koon, but these were two no-name Jedi from the Order of 10,000. Obi-Wan looked at Jinn and then back into the yellow eyes of Maul. He looked like a cornered animal. He was fighting like his life was on the line. The truth is that he was. Maul was backed into a corner because his master made him believe that he wouldn't be challenged when he faced the Jedi, something which was very surprising to him when he wasn't able to kill them almost instantaneously. Maul steadied himself as Jinn and Kenobi moved in at the same time. The Sith assassin panicked. He wasn't prepared enough for this moment. As he swung his blade back, he overstepped as Kenobi pierced Maul's chest with a lightsaber. Maul's eyes shot open. He felt his life leave his body. There was nowhere for him to escape the pain he felt. He just felt coldness course throughout his body. There was no escape from the death that was coming for him. Qui-Gon kicked Maul's blade away and knelt down. He placed his hand on Maul's forehead and used the Force to calm him. Jinn knew that Maul would have made a fine Jedi had he not been picked up by the Sith. Obi-Wan looked at Jinn and asked,
Master, what are you doing?
No matter who your enemy is, we must show compassion. We are Jedi, Obi-Wan. And while this one here tried to kill us, it was not by his own choice. His fear is not his choice. It was forced onto him. The least we can do now is give him a peaceful exit so that he may experience a little bit of freedom before his death.
Obi-Wan nodded as Maul's eyes lost their yellow tint and he faded away. He didn't become a Jedi, but he felt peace for the very first time in his life. Ever since his birth, he was stolen from his tribe, given up by Mother Talzin and given to Sidious. The Sith Lord installed nothing but hatred, fear, and anger into his heart. He never experienced peace in his life. He was trained to be an animal of the dark side. Jinn didn't need to know that to see it. Qui-Gon can tell from the terrified expression on Maul's face by the time the battle was over. It wasn't that he feared the Jedi, he feared living long enough to see what his master would do to him. Had he survived the duel, he would have found a way to blame the Jedi for his demise. But because death was knocking on his door, he had no one but death to fear. Qui-Gon stood up and walked over to his apprentice, placing his hand on his shoulder. It was time that they searched for Anakin and helped the Queen with the rest of their assault. When the two Jedi got back to the hangar bay, it was clear that Anakin was missing. The echoes of blaster fire were also gone, leaving the hangar bay barren, a barren land of silence and destruction. The palace then shook when the sound of an ATT exploding outside the hangar bay erupted. Obi-Wan looked at Qui-Gon as if he were asking what the next move was. Qui-Gon didn't know himself, but all that mattered at the moment was that the people of Naboo could be freed from the Trade Federation. Luckily, it had happened. Across Naboo, liberation was seeing the light of day. The droid army began collapsing after almost destroying the entirety of the Gungan army. Padme and her guard were able to secure the throne room and capture Nute Gunray. This was all because Anakin Skywalker and his handy little droid, R2-D2, destroyed the Lucrehulk that was in orbit of the planet. All the droids were wired to the vessel, and once the main structure was destroyed, the droids lost their power source and they went dead. Within the coming hours, Anakin would arrive in the hangar bay, safely with the rest of the Naboo pilots. Padme would hand Gunray and his group off to the Republic when they arrived, and the Jedi would accompany the newly elected Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, Sheev Palpatine, to the planet. The Jedi had already discussed their plans for Skywalker, and they passed their ruling on whether or not Skywalker would be allowed into the Order. It was a vote passed narrowly by 8-5. They wouldn't reveal their intention until Qui-Gon pressed for an answer. Qui-Gon and Anakin had talked about his intentions of training him, and Qui-Gon also expressed to Obi-Wan that he believed he was ready to pass his trials. Once the Jedi Council arrived, Mace Windu and Qui-Gon separated from the group. At the same time, Yoda and Kenobi also separated from the group. Yoda would make Kenobi a Jedi Knight for his work in killing the Sith assassin and continuing to fulfill his mandate to the Jedi Order. Obi-Wan was very proud of his new position. He worked very hard for it, and he certainly earned it. Obi-Wan would be able to celebrate with the Naboo as a Jedi Knight, though he wasn't sure where his master had gone off to. Obi-Wan found Anakin standing rather excitedly. He wanted to be a Jedi, and he was going to be trained as a Jedi as far as he knew. The prospect of being a peacekeeper of the galaxy brought warmth to his heart. He saw the profound effect the Jedi had on people across the galaxy, mostly because he was a slave, and seeing how people reacted to the Jedi with hope inspired Anakin to contribute to that. Qui-Gon and Mace talked on the side of the street as their robes matched their pace, and the two Jedi Masters discussed the fate of the boy.
Qui-Gon, we cannot allow the boy into our ranks. The Council has put it to a vote, and the majority decided to not allow him into the Order. Why do you fear him? He's a boy with the potential to be the best of us. We do not fear the boy, Qui-Gon. Why do you force him away from the Order that he could so easily protect? Because he has the opportunity to be volatile. He could destroy the Order. Even more than that, he is too old. The code forbids it. The Council is being hypocritical of its oath then, Master Windu. Look, there are two options. Forget about the boy and remain a Jedi in this Order. Or you leave it to train him, and the Council will not change its minds. And once the celebrations are over, I will take the boy and train him myself.
Mace's mouth hung open as Qui-Gon turned around and walked away from him. There wasn't even a hint of remorse or regret. Mace didn't want Qui-Gon to leave, but the fact that Jinn would just leave so eagerly surprised him. Mace knew this would have a lasting effect on the Jedi Order. No, it wasn't Anakin that Mace was worried about. He never wanted Anakin to be a part of the Order anyways, but it was the fact that Dooku had shown tendencies to want to leave the Order. With Qui-Gon leaving it, it would certainly give Dooku more incentive to join his former student in leaving the Jedi. This would backfire heavily in Yoda's face. Dooku was Yoda's final student, and having his student leave because of a decision the Council voted on wouldn't be a good look on the Jedi Council. Mace held his head up as he turned the corner and saw Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Dooku walking together.
Obi-Wan, I want to congratulate you on your journey to becoming a Jedi Knight.
Thank you, Master. But why do I feel that something has been changed?
Well, that's why I wanted to talk to the two of you. I'm leaving the Jedi Order.
Master, why?
The Council will not let me train Anakin. I promised that I would train him, and that is what I intend to do. Sadly, the Council does not see eye to eye with me on this matter.
Surely there has to be another...
It makes perfect sense, Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan, you must see that the Council has its faults, and it should be held accountable for them. Qui-Gon, If you feel it is right, then I will help you train the boy.
Obi-Wan looked at both Jedi Masters. His heart broke. He didn't know what to do. His master was leaving, and so was his Grand Master Dooku. Obi-Wan had two masters in a row that led back to him leaving before his eyes, and now he didn't know what to do. A million thoughts ran through his head as he looked at the Jedi that stood before him. Dooku placed his hand on Qui-Gon's shoulder in a reassuring way, as if to tell his former student that he would back him up all the way in this. Obi-Wan, to a certain extent, felt abandoned. Sure, he was no longer Qui-Gon's student, but it felt like his teacher was giving up on him to train someone else, abandoning the order to train someone who may not react well to being trained in the ways of the Jedi. Obi-Wan looked down at the ground. He felt lost in his heart, and Qui-Gon walked over and placed his hand on Kenobi's shoulder and said to him,
Do not mourn my leaving, Obi-Wan. There are great things ahead of you, and I know that if you follow your heart, you will find what was truly meant for you.
Obi-Wan looked at his master with confusion on his face, as Qui-Gon smiled softly and nodded his head, as if to gesture to something they were talking about or actively implying, but Obi-Wan had no clue. Qui-Gon had an idea in his mind, but it was up to Obi-Wan to find out what it was and what he needed to find. Qui-Gon remembered something from his own past and something in Obi-Wan's past. Both were very similar, something that made both Jedi almost leave the Order. Qui-Gon regretted it, but now he had Skywalker to train. He understood that the Force was leading him towards something greater. He believed that Kenobi could also find something greater beyond that of a normal Jedi. He was hoping that his leaving would inspire Obi-Wan, and though Qui-Gon was surprised that Dooku would just leave the Order, he was happy to have Dooku with him. It provided them the opportunity to train Anakin in a way that no one had ever been taught. Well, maybe once or twice in the past, but never recently. Before the celebration could begin, Anakin, Dooku, and Qui-Gon whisked themselves away under the cover of the excitement in the streets. The trio would take a shuttle that the Queen allowed them to take, and thanks to their kindness and dedication to her and her people, they would take the shuttle back to Anakin's homeworld. Anakin had no clue where they were going and where he was being taken, but he did know that it was somewhere special, by the relative excitement from Qui-Gon and Dooku. The trip was relatively short, but ended up back on the planet Anakin hated the most. They were back on Tatooine, though Dooku and Anakin stayed in the ship while Qui-Gon left. Anakin didn't know what Qui-Gon was doing, but during the meantime, he and Dooku got relatively close with one another. They talked about anything and everything. Anakin was curious as to why Dooku left the Order, and he explained himself. Much like Qui-Gon, he was tired of the hypocrisy of the Council. The way the Jedi was fine, but they had become too political, and because of that, people were allowed to suffer. Anakin understood much of what was said to him by Dooku, but when Qui-Gon came back, Anakin jumped out of his skin. It had only been a day or two since he was last here, but he was excited to see his mother. Qui-Gon had freed her from slavery. He and Dooku had enough credits to free her. But for now, they would be leaving Tatooine after setting Shmi up with enough credits to get herself started in Mos Espa. It was a gift that kept on giving for Anakin. Finding the Jedi, being kind to them, offering them shelter, and winning a race for them, they could have abandoned him. But they didn't. They took care of him, and they would continue to take care of him for the meantime. From Tatooine, the former two Jedi would take Anakin to a planet in the Mid-Rim called Ondrilion. It was a green and blue globe in the middle of the Mid-Rim. Its lush forests once housed a group of Force users, wielders of the balance and bringers of peace. They are originally a splinter group of the Jedi. These beings practice under the name of the Uturund. They were extinguished by the Sith over a millennia before the era of the High Republic. The Uturund practiced the Force much like the Barando sages, and they were even very friendly with them. The Uturund didn't go too far away from Ondrilion as they preferred keeping close to their homeworld. But when it came to protecting and serving the people in the galaxy, they found themselves going out. It's what led them to being found by the Sith and eventually being destroyed by the Sith, though their ruins remained. Once the three arrived, Anakin was in shock by what they found. Dooku was impressed as well. He had learned about the Uturund at one point in his life, but he never thought that Jinn would take them to Ondrilion to teach Skywalker. Regardless, Qui-Gon stepped out as he looked around and watched Anakin's eager eyes look over the temple that stood before them. The sun was beginning to set on the Bakator temple. The sun lined over Anakin's eyes as a smile glimmered under his nose. He looked back at Master Qui-Gon, who smiled gently, and then spoke up as he directed Anakin to look at the Bakator temple.
Anakin, this is the Bokator Temple, home of the ancient Droid. These Force users were not grey Jedi, but they respected the Force and all it had to offer. The Droid code was that of honor, truth, humility, and knowledge. Here, Master Dooku and I will teach you these traits.
So, I'll become an Droid?
No. You will become who you were always meant to be, Anakin. The one meant to bring balance to the Force.
Anakin smiled. He was excited, but he wasn't truly aware of what the two former Jedi would put him through. Qui Gon and Dooku would take their roles as father and grandfather for Anakin, but they would be both his teacher. Their responsibilities to him were immeasurable. They would need to teach him the ins and outs of using the Force responsibly. Qui Gon knew this would be very difficult of a task, but secretly he was happy that the Jedi Council essentially forced him out of the Order. It would have been so much harder for Qui Gon to train Anakin under the code of the Jedi. Their order would have made Anakin miserable as a student. Here on Andrilion, Anakin would have a wide open space, the code of an ancient, non-Jedi religion, and the confidence to grow on his own. Qui Gon and Dooku would also be the perfect guides for Anakin. Sure, they weren't necessarily superior users of the Force, but they could provide Anakin their own inspiration for his training. Qui Gon and Dooku would allow Anakin to run around the grounds of the ancient Bakator temple. There was nothing that could cause him any suffering or pain here, so he should be free to go out on his own, experience freedom for the first time. Qui Gon and Dooku talked back and forth with each other. They each had a great deal of concern about how they would train the boy, as Dooku spoke first.
Qui Gon, how do you intend on training Anakin? First, you must be what Anakin has always been missing. From there, we will teach him not just the ways of the Droid, but the Force.
Dooku understood the direction. Anakin had never had a father or a father figure, so the two of them needed to give him that. It would probably be an arduous journey for young Skywalker, but with two teachers who continuously cared about his growth, the chances for him to accelerate were unimaginable. For the time being, Dooku and Jinn would set up camp, allowing Anakin ample time to get a feel for the ruins and also a feel for freedom and what it was like for the first time. When the morning came, they would begin his training. While Dooku was curious to see as to how this approach they were taking with Skywalker would go, he fully trusted his former student to have everything planned out for Skywalker to develop naturally. On the other side of the galaxy, Obi-Wan paced around his room. He spoke aloud to himself. He couldn't figure out why Qui-Gon or what Qui-Gon meant by what he said. Was there something hidden? Obi-Wan spoke to himself as he walked around the small room he had.
What did Master Qui-Gon mean? I don't understand. What great things could be ahead of me? I've lost my master. Was it something in my past? Maybe New Absalom? No. Mandalore. Did Qui-Gon really mean?
Obi-Wan would grab a transmitter from the corner of the room, and he would have it ring someone he used to be very close to. Maybe it was impulsive, but what other options did he have? Obi-Wan closed his eyes and waited. The hollow transmission went to a voicemail of sorts, and Obi-Wan waited for a little ding. Obi-Wan took a deep breath. It had been years. What was he thinking? This was such a dumb idea. He bit his lip, and then he spoke.
Hello there. I know it's been quite a while. I'll be honest. My master left the Order, and while I've become a knight, I have to say that I miss you more than ever. Maybe it's what Master Qui-Gon told me before he left, or the memory left in my heart for you. But I'd like to see you again. Not as a Jedi.
Obi-Wan sat there quietly for a moment as he watched the hollow transmitter flicker. His heart stopped, and then he silenced it. A million more thoughts ran through his head, and most of them were negative, especially him questioning himself for what he was thinking by sending a message to Satine. She was the Duchess of Mandalore. She didn't have time for stuff like that. Why would she care? Sure, they had a nice moment on Mandalore when they were with each other, but still. Obi-Wan got down against his bed and leaned his head back against the wall. He was a Jedi. He knew he was better than this, but he felt so abandoned. Sure, Qui-Gon's words were kind, but they were so mysterious. They didn't give him a clear direction. Maybe there was a clear direction, but he didn't know what it was. When the morning came on Andrilion, Anakin jumped with excitement. His speed and energy was a bit much for the two elder teachers. Jinn was pushing his 50s, and Dooku was much older than that. But they were instructors, and the first lesson would commence. It'd be a simple instruction for Skywalker to connect himself to the Force. Jinn was able to use Anakin's skills as a pod racer to help back up Anakin's lack of confidence. Dooku, who was still learning about Skywalker, watched as Jinn and Anakin stood in a small courtyard surrounded by the heads of the ancient Bukkator temple. Anakin sat on a boulder, and that was directly in the middle of the courtyard. He looked at Qui Gon as he explained how to let the Force flow through him. Anakin didn't quite understand it. It was as if Qui Gon was speaking anything other than Galactic Common. It was weird listening to how Qui Gon broke everything down in front of him. Anakin listened as his mouth hung open. He was mystified by the way Qui Gon spoke. He was like a warlock. His understanding, compassion, and humility was beyond wondrous. Anakin truly respected Qui Gon and respected him by looking up to him. Dooku, he wasn't sure about yet. Dooku walked around almost aimlessly in the background as Anakin and Qui Gon went through basic instruction. The first few weeks would go very similarly. Anakin would continue to learn from Qui Gon exclusively until one day, Anakin, who was running around the Bukkator temple playing, fell into a small pit. It was boarded up or something, and Anakin tumbled down into it. He fell on a sharp object and it really hurt him. Anakin was completely caught off guard by the little fall that he fell. He looked up and saw the light glimmering over his head. The weather on Andrillion was perfect, but he was stuck down here. Anakin looked down at what he landed on and brushed off some dust, and realized that he landed on a lightsaber of sorts. It was very old and had inscribed wording on the side of it. It seemed as if it belonged to someone special. Anakin ignited the blade and outshot a green lightsaber. Anakin was in shock. It was a beautiful blade, almost emerald of sorts, and the inscribing on the side made Anakin wonder what it said. But he had bigger issues. He was stuck. He called out aimlessly into the air. The light above him was cut out by a shadow. It looked to be Master Dooku. The taller man looked down at Anakin and saw the blade that Anakin was holding. Then he spoke.
Anakin, I need you to jump to me. I'll catch you and pull you up.
But Master, it's too high. I can't do that.
You can. You have to trust the Force. Let it guide you out.
Okay, I can try.
No, Anakin. As my old master used to say, do or do not. There is no try.
Anakin looked up and lowered himself to the ground as he focused on the movement in the air around him. He thought about the jump he needed to make to get to Dooku's hand. He envisioned grabbing Dooku's hand and being pulled up to the surface by the Master. Anakin placed the lightsaber on his belt and lunged up as he grabbed the dirt and leveraged himself forward into the air. Dooku was shocked. He believed Anakin could do it, but never would have assumed he'd get it in the first try. Dooku grabbed Anakin's hand and pulled him up, out and over the small hole.
Good job, young Skywalker.
Thank you, Master. How did you know I could do that?
The Force is strong with you, Anakin. Here's a lesson for you. Remember, Anakin, that when you fall, you must always get back up.
I will, Master.
Good. Now, what is that you have there?
I found this lightsaber with writing on it.
Anakin handed Dooku the blade as Dooku studied it for a hot moment as he read each line out loud. It wasn't Galactic Common, but it was the ancient language of the Jedi. Before the Jedi got out and overexpanded their reach, the Utahrun abandoned the Order and must have used the same language as the ancient Jedi. It was hard to read, but Dooku knew it well. He was close with Jocasta Nu, the Jedi archivist. Because of this bond he had with Jocasta, he would be able to read the writing back to Anakin. Dooku studied the words as he read them aloud, as he slowed his speech between each word to make sure that he got it all right.
It says that the one meant to bring peace will wield this and light the galaxy from its darkest hours.
What does this mean, Master?
It means you found what was calling to you. It was no coincidence you fell into that hole. It was the Force guiding you. This blade was always meant to be yours, and the Utahrun knew that when it was first forged. Anakin, this blade is for you.
Anakin looked awestruck as he held the blade in his hands and looked it over. He was incredibly excited to wield this blade. He needed to learn how to use it first, but for now, Anakin could keep it and look forward to the day of which he'd be able to use the weapon. Though little did Anakin and Dooku realize how important this moment was for their bond as master and apprentice. Of course, Jinn and Anakin had their bond, but Dooku and Anakin were rather stale with one another up until this moment. Across the galaxy on Coruscant, Obi-Wan woke up to a message on his communicator. It had been weeks since he left Satine a voicemail. He assumed she heard it and thought nothing of it. But Obi-Wan woke up in the corner of his room as he turned on his communicator and listened back to the message. It read as Satine said, as softly as she could, "My dearest Obi-Wan, I will treasure what we had when you were here by my side all those years ago. If you need me, I'm always here for you, Jedi or not." She apologized for not responding sooner. The message finally came through, and she wanted to make sure she got back to him as soon as possible. The communication then ended, and Obi-Wan laid his head back against the wall. A tear rolled down his eye. It meant everything to him for Satine to just respond. It was so kind and warm. It was obvious that Obi-Wan needed this. The question is, for Obi-Wan, was he ready to just forego the Jedi Order and visit Satine with a chance that she could have moved on, or not? Obi-Wan couldn't wait though. He jumped up and ran to the hangar bay. He was going to Mandalore. On Andrillion, months would etch their way into years. Anakin's progress would be unfathomably positive. Anakin would be 15 by this point, and a lot had changed since he began his training. Anakin, Qui-Gon, and Dooku grew together exponentially well. Their bond was extremely familial. Anakin grew into his maturity extremely well as well. With Qui-Gon being his teacher, Anakin was able to feel attachments, and learn that attachments were a healthy way of growth for a Force user. Without being a Jedi, Qui-Gon was able to teach his beliefs to Anakin. Qui-Gon and Dooku both raised Anakin into an elegant young man. While Anakin was formerly a slave, the guidance of Jinn and Dooku helped him healthily come to terms with his past and move on from the atrocities done to him as a child. It also helped that he was able to frequently go from Andrillion to Tatooine to visit his mother. Andrillion was also the perfect place for Anakin to train. He's surrounded by forests, the ancient ruins of the balanced group of Force users, and of course, he was with Jinn and Dooku. Anakin found himself being exceptionally versatile with a lightsaber, though he didn't use any of the traditional lightsaber forms used by Jedi or Sith. Yes, Anakin was taught Form 2 by Dooku and Form 4 by Qui-Gon, but the Utta-Rund had scrolls throughout the Bakator Temple that showed there was once a more powerful lightsaber form. Of course, only those who followed the way of the Utta-Rund were likely to be able to master this form, but Dooku and Jinn committed themselves to helping Anakin discover the secrets. The Utta-Rund, while having mostly been former Jedi, combined their knowledge of the light side and their understanding of the dark to create a form that used elements of each side of the Force to its maximum, whilst giving the duelists the full range of acrobatic movements using the least amount of energy. The Utta-Rund called this form Khmer, or Form 1. It wasn't by any means similar to a normal Form 1 because it was created by the Utta-Rund. Most of its members creating this form used staves instead of lightsabers, though it must be said that once the Utta-Rund combined Khmer with a lightsaber, it became the perfect form of lightsaber combat. It wasn't overly offensive and it wasn't overly defensive. Its acrobatics required that the user conserve their energy while maneuvering like the seeds of Kamino. The Utta-Rund's understanding of not just the Force but their weaponry allowed them to build the greatest lightsaber form the galaxy had ever seen. Qui-Gon and Dooku's training of Anakin was heavily inspired by their own moral beliefs, but they so happened to coincide with what the Utta-Rund believed as well, a balance and tranquility within the Force that couldn't be stopped by light or dark. Anakin thrived with Qui-Gon as a father figure especially. The bond between Dooku and Anakin was special, but nothing like the one between Jinn and Skywalker. From the first day on Andrillion, Qui-Gon treated Anakin like a son, and while Qui-Gon was certainly not a father, he filled the role with little to no issue. Qui-Gon didn't force his hand on Anakin, and he allowed Anakin to grow naturally, and when the time came, he and Dooku pushed Anakin to become the warrior he was in the moment. Specifically, Anakin, Dooku, and Qui-Gon were in the middle of a sparring session. Dooku backpedaled as Anakin struck forward, throwing his blade forward in a fury as Dooku blocked every strike calmly. Anakin pushed forward and then swung his blade around as he collided with Qui-Gon's blade. Anakin was caught between both of his masters. Their grins told Skywalker that he had lost, but the confidence of the young Chosen One was unbelievable. Anakin swung his blade back and forth as he smacked against both Qui-Gon and Dooku's blade. Anakin stepped back as he ran forward and leaped into the air, placing his hand out over his head and using his hand to propel him over his two masters. Anakin then steadied himself around in Khmer as he focused on the blade forward, tapping against Dooku, as the master made a counter against him. Anakin stepped back and back again as he blocked every strike coming towards him. Anakin pulled Dooku's wrist forward as he rolled around Dooku's back and collided blades with Jinn. Anakin pushed forward against Jinn as their two green blades lit up the ruins. Anakin swung ferociously, but one wouldn't be able to tell based on the fact that every strike Anakin made looked as light as a feather, though Anakin was just using the Utto Run form of lightsaber combat. Its movements were very light in appearance, but their strikes and landing destinations were very heartfelt. It was almost a defensive form used aggressively, though it could be said the same vice versa. Anakin pushed Qui Gon off of his feet as he reached out with the Force to make sure his older master didn't hit the ground with too much force. Anakin lowered Qui Gon to the ground as he turned around and looked into the eyes of Dooku, who stood adjacent to him. Anakin was going to win the spar. It was very hard for him to beat Dooku most of the time. For Jinn, it was 50-50. Dooku, on the other hand, was an impeccable duelist, which wasn't a takeaway from Qui Gon. Form 2 just allowed Dooku to be more precise as a duelist, and it allowed him to be more persistent in a sparring session. Anakin looked at Dooku as he rolled his lightsaber around in his wrist and stood in the aggressive stance of Khmer. Anakin leapt forward as Dooku jumped into defense. Dooku looked at Anakin with the look of superiority and a feeling of being unbothered by Anakin's aggressive approach. Dooku grinned as he stepped back, blocking each strike. Anakin pulled back a little, and then he sidestepped Dooku as he kicked up, sending Dooku's blade from his hand. Dooku turned around and kept moving without his blade. Anakin wouldn't let Dooku beat him unarmed, so he did the best possible option. Anakin rolled across the ground and used the Force to break the ground under Dooku's feet, making his master lose his balance. Dooku tumbled back as Anakin also caught him with the Force, gently putting him down. Anakin stood tall and looked back over at the two of his older masters, and he had the largest smile, saying,
"See, I told you I'd beat you both."
Remember your humility, but you did well.
A pull in your chain, Master. How'd I do, Master Qui-Gon?
Like Dooku said, you did well. You've truly grown into yourself, Anakin.
It's all because of your training, Masters. I couldn't have any other way.
You must thank yourself in that case, Anakin. You're the one who put in the work to become who you are today.
Thank you, me. How's that?
That sure is a good start. But maybe internalize it next time.
Anakin bowed respectfully to both of his masters. As he smiled, both Dooku and Jinn reciprocated the bow, and then they responded with their own bow towards Anakin. They were very proud of the young man he'd become in the recent years. While Anakin's development found him nothing but happiness, love, compassion, and everything of the sort, the galaxy around them was ever-changing. Obi-Wan fortunately was able to find love with Satine and leave the Order. She welcomed him to Mandalore with open arms, and neither of them looked back ever since. The Jedi continued to be corrupt and overshadowed by the greed of the Republic, and while the Sith Lord, Chief Palpatine, was still the Chancellor of the Galactic Republic, he had another plan in place. Without Dooku, Maul, or Plagueis to help him with his plans, he had to find another way for destroying the Jedi. It was through nanobite technology. Though it was in his early developments, he had scientists working on the technology, and these scientists were from Kamino. Though Palpatine had no intention of cloning, instead he was going to simply bomb the Jedi Temple to the ground, eliminating all of his threat in one. In their demise, he would continue to find loopholes in the corrupt Republic and establish his lasting power. It wouldn't be that hard. Sidious thought about getting another apprentice, possibly a fallen Jedi, or even Savage, the sibling of his former student. But Sidious thought it would be a waste of time. He was doing well by himself, and having another failed student didn't seem worthwhile. There was also the fact that he didn't really want to have another training student. Sidious was more focused on having another student in Skywalker, but he hadn't seen Anakin around the Jedi Order lately. Sidious didn't really know that Anakin wasn't allowed into the Order, and he didn't really have time to know though. He had been Chancellor of the Galactic Republic for the last several years. He had recently won his re-election in a landslide. Palpatine brilliantly manipulated the Republic to trust him blindly. While Palpatine knew he could throw the galaxy into war, he didn't want the stress of having a war on his hands. The Jedi would never see it coming. The destruction would be swift and steady. Palpatine had a bounty hunter that would help him sign off the end of the Jedi Order. Jango Fett was the best bounty hunter in the galaxy, and while he hadn't been commissioned for the Clone Army, he was assisting Palpatine on this project. He would be testing out the nanobite technology on political adversaries to slow down the chance of him losing popularity within the Republic. Back on Andrillion, Anakin meditated in the air. He could feel the Force flow through him. Anakin was much a vessel of the Force as he was born of the Force. His training over the past several years helped him achieve a balance he never thought he could achieve. Anakin lowered himself to the ground as he felt his masters walk up behind him. Anakin opened his eyes and lowered the rocks that were surrounding him while he was meditating. Anakin looked at the aging Master Dooku and Master Qui Gon. The two of them looked at Anakin with a level of concern, so Anakin spoke up.
What's going on, Masters?
We're going to be heading to Zygeria, Anakin. It's time we stop the Zygerian Empire from committing atrocities on the people of the galaxy.
But that's not the only reason we're leaving, is it?
Well, Anakin, you've completed all the training we can give you. You require a teacher of a much greater magnitude.
Who will that teacher be?
Of that we do not know yet, Anakin, but we trust that if the Force guides you, you will find the teacher that can take you to where you belong.
You two will be coming with me, right?
We will always be with you, Anakin. But for the next part of your journey, after Zygeria, will be for you to tackle alone.
Anakin looked at his two masters as he reached out and gave them both a massive hug. The truth is that Dooku and Jinn taught Anakin everything they knew. Anakin was an exceptional duelist, but he was an accelerated Force user. He came in his own with Dooku and Jinn teaching him. Anakin braved the caves of Dagobah, faced the Force on Lothal, confronted the darkness and the light on Ahch-To, and found peace on Antolion. Though Anakin felt a draw to head back to Antolion. Anakin had his journey of a lifetime with Masters Jinn and Dooku. Their training for him guided him to become the best version of himself. Though for Anakin, Andrilion would always be his home, and the Ata Rund would always give him a place of comfort. Though what Jinn and Dooku said was true. The most growth Anakin would have in his abilities would happen when he was outside of his comfort zone. It would require Anakin to journey far into the galaxy alone. At his age, it was a bit scary of a thought, but Anakin trusted himself. Dooku, Anakin, and Qui-Gon would leave Andrilion and make their way towards Zygeria. If the Jedi or the Republic weren't going to put an end to slavery, well then these former Jedi would. It was simply better for the people of the galaxy. The Zygerians were some of the cruelest slave traders in the galaxy, and they needed to be dealt with. As the group traveled through hyperspace, Anakin wondered how they would approach taking down a slave empire. Dooku and Jinn had a plan, but Anakin, being the youngest, would have the most active role in the group. Dooku and Jinn were getting too old for this, so they ensured Anakin would be placed in the position where their mission would go most successfully. Over the course of the next several hours, on the trip to Zygeria, Anakin would be given his plan and the location of where he would go. Since the three of them weren't wearing traditional Jedi garments, they would be able to go unnoticed. Their mission was simple: free the slaves and bring down the Zygerian crown. When they landed at one of the private landing ports, they were ready to go. The capital city of Zygeria was massive. Dooku split off first, as the essentially father and son duo of Anakin and Qui-Gon walked through the streets. As they got closer to the palace that shot up over the city, Qui-Gon placed his hand on Anakin's shoulder and gave him a warm smile. That's all that needed to be done. Their bond was so grounded that they didn't need to say anything to tell each other something. Their shoulder placement was as simple as "I love you." Qui-Gon then turned and walked down an alley towards some Zygerian guards. Anakin was heading to the palace. Within minutes, a massive explosion rang out from the far side of the city. Dooku must have completed his first part of his objective. Because they weren't Jedi, they had free reign on what they could do when they needed to get their objective finished. Dooku set off a bomb in the armory, which may or may not have been full of soldiers. Anakin picked up speed as guards from around the palace abandoned the palace and ran towards the explosion. It was time. Anakin started running forward as he looked at the palace. The gates of the palace were still guarded, so Anakin decided to avoid the front door. He leapt up and ignited his lightsaber as he jabbed into the side of the wall. Anakin used his lightsaber to launch himself up more and more and more, as he jabbed the lightsaber into the wall to propel himself forward. Within moments, Anakin was on a balcony, thousands of feet above the city. Several guards saw him as they ran over to stop him. A critical mistake, as Anakin kicked himself forward and used the Force to throw the guards off the balcony. Anakin stepped forward after throwing the guards to their deaths. Anakin was here for the Queen. He was going to gut her, and then he would free the slaves inside of the palace. Other than the diversion that Dooku set up, there was no reason to believe the Queen was in any duress. Anakin walked through the doors at the top of the complex as he looked at the throne the Zygerian Queen sat on. She looked at Anakin and was extremely confused. Anakin, though, looked through his eyebrows. His anger wasn't present. He was calm and collected. He was here to bring a better life for those unfortunate enough to be captured by the slavers. She couldn't say anything before Anakin speared his lightsaber across the room into her chest. She looked at Anakin with shock on her face as she dropped to the floor. The slave that was in the room looked at Anakin in fear, and Anakin spoke calmly to her.
It's okay. I'm here to free you. Are there any more of you inside of the palace?
The slave pointed towards the door as several guards walked in and yelled. Anakin pulled his lightsaber from the queen's dead body as he ignited it in mid-air as he ran towards the slavers. Anakin landed on the ground as he cut through their weapons. Anakin was quick to work as he lifted 2 of them into the air and struck his blade at the other few. Anakin threw the other 2 out the windows on the other side of the palace as he moved his body around and cut down the final guard. Anakin looked back at the slave, but she was gone. Anakin figured she must have meant that there were more slaves forward. As Anakin started walking, a siren rang out throughout the city. Anakin turned around and ran out to the balcony. He looked down and saw more explosions ring out across the city. Then he saw Zygerian guards running away from massive groups of slave rioters that ran down the streets after them. Anakin smiled. They were freeing the slaves from the Zygerian Empire. This was working brilliantly. Anakin turned back around and ran back into the palace as he searched far and wide for more slaves. When he found them, he used the Force to free them from their shackles. The slaves all began to run out into the streets. As Anakin ran down into the streets, he saw a massive protest or riot going on. It was both incredible and terrifying. People were running rampant, and the Zygerians were in full retreat. The slaves were able to arm themselves, and the Zygerians without their armories or suitable weaponry found themselves in a predicament. Dooku was on the far side of the city as he cut down the Zygerians that tried to use their electro whips on the slaves. Jinn, on the other hand, avoided combat with many of the guards, even though he really didn't see any. Anakin ran through the crowds of rioters. It was amazing seeing people so similar to him taking back their right to freedom. Slaves pushed back citizen militia and Zygerian warriors. They had the numbers advantage after all, but their hearts shined brighter than any of the stars in the sky, and their will to win was unstoppable. Anakin leaped between groups of people as he avoided running into the rioters, or the slavers. Anakin was running as fast as he could to get back to the rendezvous point. When he got there, both Dooku and Jinn were waiting patiently. It seemed as if they had completed what they had come here to complete. It was the freedom of the slaves, captured by the Zygerians. It felt good. While Anakin had been shown how to help people in the past, he never had the opportunity to set forth a planetary change. What they did on Zygeria would help fuel a fire that had almost died out. With the slaves on Zygeria having the ability to change the future for themselves, the 3 departed for Sereno. Dooku's homeworld was on Sereno. It turned out he had been born from a really wealthy family. Dooku was able to take up the rest of his estate left in his name since he was no longer a Jedi, and because he had so much money under his name, he prepared a gift for a student. It was a plan for Qui Gon and Dooku to give Anakin something before they released him out to the galaxy. There was so much Anakin could learn, but Qui Gon and Dooku couldn't teach him more than what they already had. Dooku was very proud of what had become of Anakin. While Anakin was allowed to grow as an individual in Andrilion, he also flourished by being forged into a modest young man. When the trio arrived on Sereno, Dooku took Anakin out to a landing area. When they walked out and around, Anakin looked at all the ships as Dooku turned to him and spoke.
Anakin, your training with us is now complete. It is time for you to venture out into the galaxy and start your own journey. Before you go, you will need a ship. Pick one.
I couldn't take one. It's too kind, Master.
It's all right, Anakin. Master Dooku prepared all these options for you. With these, you'll be able to journey out across the galaxy and help those in need.
Anakin grinned as he turned and looked at all the ships in front of him. Anakin stepped forward, and in front of a Corellian light freighter. It was a bit of a large ship, but also awkward to look at. Anakin looked at it. It was a brand new model with a beautiful paint job. Anakin looked at Dooku, who smiled and nodded. Anakin walked forward as he placed his hand on the hull of the ship. He walked into the interior of the vessel as he looked around, seeing all of the ship in its glory. It was a bit large for one individual, but Anakin believed that it would do him well. If he were to incorporate more people in his life, surely it would be able to fit them. Anakin moved to the cockpit as he sat down and felt a fine fabric across the interior of where he'd been flying. Anakin knew this was the ship. It was exactly what he wanted, and while it wouldn't be the fastest ship in the galaxy, Anakin was a fine mechanic. He knew he could certainly add to it. Anakin walked out as Dooku and Qui-Gon wished him luck on his journey. They also told him that he would always have a home here on Sereno. While Dooku had his palace here on Sereno, his first student, Qui-Gon, would be staying with him for the time being. It was simply easier for the two of them to be around each other. Anakin left Sereno with his Corellian light freighter. He took the ship out into the galaxy. He had no clue where to go or where he wanted to go first, but he had a feeling to go back to a planet he was on before with Qui-Gon and Dooku. The planet was Antolion, and it was out in the mid-rim a bit. It was far away from most of the Republic territory. The planet was also barren from any civilizations. All that was present were these larger spider-like creatures that had a knack for attacking without provocation. It was here on Antolion that Qui Gon taught Anakin how to become at peace with nature around him. When Anakin came to peace, the bugs didn't attack. It's one of the first places other than Dagobah where Anakin learned to control his fear. When he controlled his fear, he was no longer susceptible to the dark side of the Force. While that was kind of a Jedi teaching, both Dooku and Qui-Gon thought it would be worthwhile to teach it to Skywalker. When Anakin landed, he set up some sensors outside of his starship so that the bugs wouldn't anchor it down with their massive webs. Anakin then turned around and walked out into a valley. He believed that the Force was bringing him here. As he kept walking, a massive natural structure began to move. Anakin looked at it as he stared blankly into glowing white eyes of the Bendu. Anakin didn't know who he was, so he spoke up, asking,
Who are you? What are you? Are you the one that brought me here?
The Bendu sat there quietly as he smiled at Anakin, telling the boy that he had asked a lot of questions for being so powerful. The Bendu noted that Anakin was brought here because he wanted to see if it was true. Anakin looked at the Bendu with confusion on his face, as a towering beast told Anakin that the Force told him that there was a being that existed in the galaxy, one with complete harmony and balance within him. If he was brought to Antolion, the Bendu thought maybe he could assist this being with staying balanced. Anakin smiled at the Bendu. He was this being. Bendu was happy to see and meet Anakin, as the two of them sat adjacent from one another. Anakin wanted to know what else he could learn from the Bendu. The Bendu told Anakin to quiet himself. What Anakin could learn was silencing himself and allowing the Force to tell him what he needed. The Bendu had been alive for thousands of years. He'd seen wars between the Jedi and the Sith over millennia, and now it was a time of peace, and he knew that peace would change soon. Though that wasn't necessarily his concern at the moment. Bendu wanted to see what Anakin was made of. He wanted to see if he was the chosen one, and if he could truly keep the peace. Bendu knew that the Sith were about to strike at the Jedi. The question is if Skywalker would side with either faction. Bendu wanted to test Skywalker. There was so much potential within Anakin that Bendu didn't just want to let him fail or fall into the clutches of the dark side or the light. Bendu told Anakin to quiet his mind. While Dooku and Jinn were probably the best teachers Anakin could have ever gotten, they were both still humans. Humans were more flawed than a being who would have seen the fall and rise of the galaxy. Bendu could be the guide that Anakin needed for the time being. He wasn't going to train Anakin, he was just going to teach Anakin to teach himself. Anakin was powerful, wise, and strong as he'd ever been. His saber skills rivaled that of Dooku and Jinn, which meant he could probably handle himself with Sidious or Yoda. But none of that mattered to Bendu. Anakin had the highest midichlorian count the galaxy ever saw. Bendu was going to give Anakin the tools to do his own teaching, and then from there, Anakin would head off into the galaxy and do whatever it was that he wanted with it. Anakin sat quietly as the Bendu and him began a period of what for Anakin would become fasting. Bendu wanted Anakin to calm his mind down, make his body weak, and allow the Force to flow through him at its fullest. Anakin listened to the Bendu as the two of them sat across from one another silently. The period of silence would last for several hours. The hours would turn slowly into days. Anakin's focus on the Force impressed the Bendu. He had never seen or presumed that Anakin would allow the Force to become so present in his life. Anakin felt the presence, or lack there, of heart. There was also a darkness bellowing, not from him, but something else. Anakin also felt the Force as he realized that he was meant to allow events to transpire. Which events, Anakin didn't know. As far as Anakin knew, he was just obeying the will of the Force. After several days of meditation and fasting, Anakin and Bendu would part ways. The Bendu wished Anakin well and told him he always had a place here. When Anakin got back to his ship, he felt a pullback from his homeworld of Tatooine, so that's where he went. Anakin would return to Tatooine and visit his mother for a short while. One day, while Anakin was in a cantina, he was approached by a young woman. She was around the same age as him, and she told him that she would like to buy him a drink. Anakin was a little taken aback by the forwardness, especially since Anakin had been trained alone. Also, Anakin wasn't used to being flirted with, because he was never around any young women his own age. Anakin allowed her to do so as they exchanged their names. Her name was Zenna Pax. She was a local smuggler. She didn't have a big name in the crime industry, but she was just known enough to get jobs on Mos Espa and Mos Eisley for the most part. As the two talked, the entire cantina went silent. Anakin and Zena looked over their shoulders as they looked at a holo prompt that read across the screen. The Jedi Temple was bombed. The entire structure was ripped apart, and from the wreckage was a shiny crimson pyramid. Nothing too large, but Anakin was taken aback. Sure, he had his reasons to dislike the Jedi, but not even he would have ever wanted the Jedi to die in this way. Zena looked at the prompt and then back to Anakin, asking if he was alright. Anakin nodded, as he solemnly told her that he was supposed to be a Jedi once, but he was too old to become a Jedi. Anakin told her that he was going to be honest for a moment, saying that he was what the Jedi proclaimed to be the Chosen One. Zena asked what he meant. Anakin said he was born with a very high midichlorian count. It made him a powerful Force user. Zena didn't believe him. There were hundreds of people that would always say they were Jedi, to get some money here or there. Anakin lifted Zena's drink off the ground with the Force. She looked at the glass and then rolled back Anakin's sleeves, seeing nothing but bare skin. He wasn't lying to her, and it was obvious. Anakin then got a communication. It was Master Jinn.
1 second. I gotta take this. Hello, Master Jinn.
Anakin, did you see what happened to the Jedi Temple?
I did. I'm going to Coruscant to see what happened, and if it was the Sith.
Dooku said he believed the Sith were behind this. We'll meet you there.
No need to, Master. This is my destiny, and I will face it the way I was destined to.
If that is what you believe you must do, then do so. May the Force be with you, Anakin.
Anakin looked at Zena as she looked at him. Anakin apologized for having to leave her, but she was surprisingly understanding. She then asked if she could help Anakin. Skywalker looked at her and told her he had no reason to believe that she would be trustworthy. Zena smiled and said if she wasn't trustworthy, then he should have no issue with killing her. Anakin thought this would be incredibly weird of a thing to say, but he figured he'd allow her to tag along. The two of them left the cantina and made their way towards Anakin's Corellian light freighter. Zena was impressed, wondering how Anakin came to possess such a vessel. Anakin just smiled as the two boarded the vessel. On Coruscant, the Chancellor gave a public address memorializing the Jedi, which were all lost. When the address was over, Sidious smiled and told Masameda he would like to go investigate the wreckage himself. It had been thousands of years since the Sith could access the temple that was covered by the Jedi Temple. He wondered what kind of artifacts could be hidden inside of it. As Sidious arrived at the wreckage, he smiled. The flames and rubble couldn't match the excitement in Sidious, mind the smell of the burning Jedi. They were all dead, and the nanobites did their job. Sidious was now going to set himself as the primary leader of the galaxy, without a war and without any competition. As Sidious walked across the rubble, he heard a starship get close to him. As he turned around and looked up, he saw a Corellian light freighter. Anakin looked at Zena and told her to keep the vessel safe. He expected to see her after this, so that he could buy her a drink. Zena winked back at Anakin as he ran from the cockpit down the small ramp below. Anakin ignited his lightsaber as he leaped into the air and fell hundreds of feet to the ground. His hair whisked behind his head as the wind whipped across his face. Anakin fell as he landed heavily on the ground, holding his lightsaber next to him. He looked up and recognized the Chancellor. Anakin couldn't actually believe that the Sith would be the Chancellor, but Anakin closed his eyes for a brief moment. He felt the wind change in the air, and he could smell all of the rotten smells of burnt and destroyed rubble. Anakin then looked at Sidious, speaking aloud.
So you're the reason the Force is out of balance.
Who are you, boy?
I'm the one who's gonna bring the galaxy harmony after I kill you.
You're no Jedi.
That's correct. I'm your worst nightmare.
Anakin lunged forward with his lightsaber drawn. Sidious dropped back as he turned on both of his lightsabers. Anakin jabbed forward as he brought his blade back over his head and blocked a strike from Sidious. Anakin was everything he needed to be for this battle. Zena was able to find a place to land Anakin's ship as she looked out and down at the battle below. Part of her thought about stealing his ship. It'd be a great vehicle to sell. But something about Anakin was so alluring, and even more, he looked like a hero. He was a hero of the Force. He was snuffing out the plague. And while the Jedi had to pay for it, at least the Sith would die on the same mound as the Jedi. Anakin was explosive with his strikes, and Sidious doubled back, blocking every strike he could. Anakin was a surprising level of strength. Sidious wasn't fully ready. Sidious jumped up, using the rubble to propel him forward. He then kicked forward as Anakin pulled Sidious around and threw him into a cluster of rubble. Sidious hissed at him and leaped away. He wasn't going to let his victory be tarnished. Zena saw Anakin's opponent running away, so she did what she could. She pulled out a long-range rifle and aimed it down at scopes and shot at Sidious. The strike was precise, but at the final moment, Sidious stopped to block it. and looked up to see Anakin flying through the air with his blade ready to kill. Sidious landed his blade against Sidious's as the two of them collided in a fiery blaze around them. Their duel was amazing to each extent. Anakin fought bravely as he connected himself to the Force. Sidious shoved Anakin back as he shot lightning from his fingertips. Anakin was quick to block the shots, and then used his own version of it as he shot electric judgment from his fingers. It was a purest form of Force electricity. Sidious wasn't ready for the lightning as it coursed through his body, leaving him in a sudden amount of pain. Anakin ran forward and slashed at Sidious. Their speed and ferocity was unmatched in the realm of the galaxy. The two sides balanced evil. Anakin was committed to restoring balance in the Force as he stabbed and parried, faster and faster. Sidious hadn't seen such speed in all of his life as he stepped back. Anakin remembered back to his early trainings with Dooku and Qui Gon. He could sense the fear in Sidious. It meant it was only a matter of time until he won this duel. Anakin struck forward and then pulled back. The two of them clashed brilliantly, as a duel could be seen across the city. It was the flames of the former Jedi Temple. Anakin was thrown from his feet when a massive piece of rubble was thrown at him. Sidious was using every dirty trick he could. Hundreds of rocks and boulders and anything Sidious could lift found itself in the air. Anakin looked at Sidious as he grinned cockily. Sidious threw the rocks as Anakin leaped side to side, before spinning around and whipping his lightsaber across the small dueling field as the blade found itself inside of Sidious's chest. The boulders all fell to the ground, creating a dust cloud. Anakin walked forward towards Sidious. The Sith Lord was still alive, holding on to his final breaths. Anakin, still with his lightsaber and the Force, dragged it up Sidious's chest as it cut through the Dark Lord's throat. Anakin watched Sidious wilt away as he lost his ability to breathe. Anakin smiled as he sheathed his own weapon and looked back up to where his ship was landed. It was missing. Anakin rolled his eyes. He knew that Zena would just betray him. A moment later, he heard the familiar hum of his ship's engines. Anakin turned around and smiled as the ship landed. Zena walked out to the ramp and smiled at Anakin, asking if he thought that she just left him. Anakin rolled his eyes again as he followed her into the ship. Anakin made his way to the cockpit and took control of his ship. The two of them would abandon Coruscant and head back out towards the Outer Rim. After the death of the Jedi and the Sith, months would pass by with peace. A new Chancellor would man the helm of the Republic and oversee the peace of the galaxy. As for Anakin and Zena, a relationship would form, very romantic, but it would also form through the love of helping others. Anakin would find his journey back to the Bendu. The Bendu smiled at Anakin, reminding him of the heart, the darkness, and the ability to let things out of his control happen. Anakin remembered, because he listened. There were no more corrupt Force users, though Bendu told Anakin that there was one more place that his journey would take him. Anakin looked at the Bendu with confusion, as the Bendu said that Andrillion would be the birthplace of not just a child, but Anakin's future. Of course, the connotation was that Zena was pregnant, but that wasn't that. It was more grandeur than just a single child. Anakin with Zena would return to Andrillion, where he would restart and build his own adaptation of the Aterund. Anakin, using the legacy of the Aterund, would construct the Order of Skywalker. This order would be for Force users far and wide. Qui-Gon and Dooku would help Anakin add to his new order, though Dooku would continue serving the people of Sereno until his natural death. Qui-Gon would spend the rest of his life within the Order of Skywalker. While Anakin wouldn't steal children or even corrupt them, his new order would allow Force users of any age to join his ranks, whether they be former Jedi that survived, Barrando sages, or Dathomirian witches. All were welcome. Though Zena was not a Force user, it didn't mean she wasn't allowed to be around or part of things, especially when she would eventually become the one to bring Anakin's only child into the galaxy. Anakin's daughter would follow in her father's footsteps, as she would eventually become the leader of the Order of Skywalker, someday. Though, for the galaxy, they would widely accept the Order of Skywalker and its deeds of justice. Anakin ensured that his order would be more efficient at giving back to the galaxy than the Jedi ever were. Anakin's order on Andrillion, at the rebuilt temple of Bakotor, would last for generations, with his descendants continuously teaching the virtues of balance. The way the Bendu would be taught for generations, as each Skywalker would have to take the path of the Bendu before becoming the Skywalker of the Order. Some of the descendants would be able to do it, others could not. But while the name of Skywalker belonged to several members of the Order, it didn't place them above anyone else. As the Order of Skywalker flourished, the Sith and the Jedi would be forgotten, as the Chosen One fulfilled his prophecy to bring balance to the galaxy for good. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Icy Raptor, Gort for supporting the channel. Let's hit 2,000 likes in this video so we can see what if cities abandon Anakin on Mustafar. The video you definitely don't want to miss. If you want to see what if, let me know below. Like, comments about crossovers, check out Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you're part of the community somewhere. Otherwise, if you want to know how to win in our next giveaway, subscribe. Shooting for 50,000 subscribers, so share, like, do all the things. Help me out with the algorithm. We're getting killed here. YouTube is just going through a moment, and you know, it's a process. But help me out here so we can give away those 3 lightsabers, and let's talk about our story, because I'm really excited to talk about the story. So this story has been done before. It has been done before. I've done a version of it before, but it wasn't titled this, and I wanted this to be special. I'll be 100% real with you. I wanted this story to be so special because it's been done. It's been done. There's several people that have done this before, and you know what? I wanted this to be better than all of theirs. I haven't watched them, I'll just be honest with you. The only one I know is relatively from memory is my old one, which was they went to Lothal instead. And I was like, okay, well, we've been to Lothal, we've been to Renvar, we've been all across the galaxy. So I decided that for this video, I would create a planet, and that is Andrillion. So for those of you, Andrillion's not a planet in Star Wars. It could be. It could be now in your own lore, but Andrillion is based off of Cambodia. There's a palace in Cambodia. I forget, I think it's Khmer Palace or something like that. And it's ancient ruins, and that's very much so based for this. So I took a lot of influence from Cambodia in this, which is where Bo-Katan comes from. I think it's the martial art in Cambodia, and I forget what Khmer is. It might be the other way around, but I wanted to use something from Earth as the inspiration for this planet. George did it all the time, and I thought it would be perfect for this story. Now, why do that? Because it adds another element to the story. It makes Qui Gon and Dooku seem wiser. It makes them seem like their knowledge of the Force is much more grander than the Jedi. The Rund, which is a made-up group. They're not a real group. I made them up. They're like the Barando sages, but I made them up. They're not all Plo Koon species. They're just a splinter group of the Jedi. The Rund broke off from the Jedi, essentially, and when the Jedi were the ancient Jedi, which is the weird spelling of it, they broke off from the Jedi and became the Rund, which was their own group of Force users. So I wanted that to be kind of special. I wanted them to be their own thing. I wanted everything that was on Cambodia planet, or as we call it, Andrillion, to be unique in its own respect, and allow Anakin to have a complete unique experience, which I hope gives more to the story than takes away from it. I wanted Anakin to have a complete new set of everything. I think that the story needed to be unique because it's Qui-Gon, and Qui-Gon teaching Anakin is such a unique and important story, because if Qui-Gon taught Anakin, the series would have never happened, right? You know, it would have ended at that. You know, it would have probably been just the prequels, and that would be that. There wouldn't be 9 movies, there would just be the first 3, and that would be the prequels. But that doesn't happen, and I wanted it to be special where Qui-Gon teaches Anakin. And when I first got into it, I was originally like, well, what about Dooku? Dooku doesn't leave the Order until Qui-Gon's death, so why not have Dooku join Qui-Gon? And it creates this nice parallel back to the what if Dooku trained Anakin story that we did a while back, but also keeping it 100% unique. I always talk about this and I try and preach it, that I always want stories to be unique. It doesn't matter how many titles are very similar to each other. I want this story to be unique as I can. I don't watch other Star Wars YouTubers because I want all my stories to be non-influenced by other creators, because each creator has their own way of writing, and I want mine to stay completely unique, and I wanted that to be the case for this one, because I know this one is a very popular theory for people to do, a very popular what if. And, you know, I brought back a character for some of you guys that might know her, Zenna Pax. We love Zenna. I had to bring her back for this. I decided that Anakin's love interest should be someone from his homeworld, someone to be kind of like a reminder of where he came from, right? And who else better than Zenna? So I wanted to tie in some other things that we've seen before on the channel, but also keep it unique in its own way. I think that Anakin being taught by Qui-Gon is a very unique story as it is alone, and I think adding to it by adding new worlds, new force ability, not force abilities, but new lightsaber forms essentially, and new characters or new force groups would add to the story. And I really hope that it had that effect for those of you watching this. So tell me what you thought down below, if you liked the story or not. This one is probably one of my favorites right now, because there's a lot of my own personal thought, that like my own personal creation that went into this. Zena, the Rund, and Andrillion being those personal creations, while also bringing a beautiful location in Earth to this. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. That's my main connotation here. I hope you all enjoyed it. So anyways, don't forget that subscribe button so we can hit 50,000. I give away your 3 lightsabers. I love you all, my friends. Spread the love, and always remember, may the Force be with you.